One thing that bothers me is, okay, I'm a skeptic, and a lot of people think they can use skepticism against skepticism in the following way that bothers me. They think that since I'm a skeptic, in some way I'm not allowed to make a compelling argument. But that's not the point. My point as a skeptic is that I'm going to include doubt. I'm going to include the knowledge we're missing in my calculations. And as a relativist, this is how I get knowledge. I have ways to subtract bias. I'm going to include that I have bias, but I'm going to subtract it. But, you know, it's not enough to say that, oh, well, you're a skeptic, therefore, you know, anything can be equally doubted. No, with relativity, I can compare things. I can still find which is more compelling. Just because I've said nothing is absolutely compelling in a final sense doesn't mean that one thing is not more compelling than another. The argument that my mother is my mother is much more compelling argument than the argument that you're my mother. Okay, so unless you are my mother, hi mom. So you know, this kind of bothers me, and it's sort of a shorthand for people that don't really understand. They see that their belief in certainty has been attacked by relativism and skepticism, and so they want to say, well, I'm going to attack your apparent certainty back. But it doesn't quite work like that. Yes, everything is relative, but it's not just an arbitrary logical everything. So for example, an interesting point, velocity is relative, right? Coordinate systems are relative. You can put the coordinate, you can say you're the center of the solar system. It's just that if you do that, then the sun moves in a big circle, the planets move in spirals, you know, and the earth is rotating around you in a really funny way. Now, why can't we believe that? Well, we can believe that. It's just that the laws of physics stop making sense if in a frame of reference like that, energy is not conserved. The fact of the matter is, while velocity is relative, rotational velocity is not relative. Because if a spinning object spins faster, then there's internal stresses tending to make that thing blow apart. And if it spins slower, then there's less of those stresses. So what's going on here is that things have relationships, and sometimes with those relationships we can triangulate down such that one thing doesn't really make sense and another alternate does make sense, and we go with the alternate. Now we know there might be further alternates that can also make sense, but we also know that the ones that don't make sense continue not to make sense. So, you know, relativism and skepticism, they don't mean you can't make compelling arguments. Quite the opposite. They help you make compelling arguments. Why? Because they're true. Nature really is skeptical and relativistic. So if you argue from the truth, you're going to make a more compelling argument. Now, people get confused about this because sometimes what's compelling to people is not reality. You know, it's their theism. So to make a compelling argument to a theist, it's best to try to tell them why they should believe something in terms of their theism. And, you know, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people that want to know what reality is like and what's compelling to people like that. And in that case, it's always to go from the truth, because even if it's not compelling in the other sense, the sort of social sense where they have their theism, for example, you can demonstrate your knowledge. You can do an experiment, and this will slowly but surely convince even those theists that maybe they have to take these other ideas into account. Now, the questions will never end. There's always more questions, but they're not the same questions. You know, Zeno's paradox about how a guy can't cross the road, that is solved, okay? We can say in many ways why that paradox is not a concern. Our doubt as skeptics and our belief that different things are true from different points of view as relativists does not change the fact that some questions get answered. It's more about there's always new questions, better questions, more informative questions. So, you know, don't think that you can tell a skeptic that they're not allowed to have a compelling argument. Science is skeptical, and it is full of compelling arguments. It helps make compelling arguments to take into account skepticism and relativism. And that's why I'm a relativistic skeptic. Okay, I wanted to add something, you know, about how skeptics get knowledge. I mean, I mentioned that it's through relativism. I mean, that's the main tool in the practical world, but there's something more fundamental to consider just within skepticism. Basically, skeptics can find knowledge through processes of elimination. And here's what you have to understand, and this is a very important truth here. According to the skeptic, nothing is 100% certain. But some things are 0% certain, right? So we can have a process of elimination. Now, how is that? Well, for example, in using quantum mechanics as our source metaphor, an electron is a probability wave. Where the wave is higher, it's most likely, and where it's lowest, it's least likely. Well, that probability wave does get to zero. Okay, it does get to zero. So possibilities can be excluded. Now, there's a little logical trap that people fall into, thinking, well, wait a second. Then I can make a statement that I'm 100% certain there is no God. And there I have 100% certainty. And, so you can, but it's a logical trap in the sense that you've just translated the words using negation and linguistic operators, so you're talking about a 0% probability. Yes, you can have a 0% probability. I think the probability of there being an omnipotent God is 0%, for example. Why? Because it's logically inconsistent. You can't have a God that can do something that it can't undo. So it's not powerful enough to do just anything. Omnipotence itself is logically incoherent. And if you think that the universe is continuous and sensible, then those kinds of things are not possible. Now, I don't have 100% certainty in those principles, so yeah, the lack of certainty still comes in that I may calculate a 0% probability for something that actually has a little bit of probability. But that doesn't change that in principle there's a big difference between things that have a 0% likelihood of being true and things that have 100%, and that you cannot have 100% truth, but you could have a 0% truth. You can eliminate things. It's just that if you have 5 options and you eliminate 4 of them and you have 1 option, the skepticism tells you, well, there's other options still. But it doesn't tell you that you can eliminate those 4 you eliminated. Those can be eliminated, and in general, they can stay eliminated.